I think it's quite useful to see how all of this fits in the context of online research methods more generally. It's useful to look at the different dimensions of online research. Firstly, in the dimension of method. So quantitative methods essentially it involves a target population. You collect a sample from that target population, and then you give a standardized instrument, research instrument. You use a standardized research instrument to collect the same data from each of those members of the sample. So it might be a survey. So I'm interested in studying the labour market in Australia, for example. I construct a survey of working people in Australia, a sample of working people in Australia, and I get each of them to fill out a survey. Typically, after coding, you're working with numerical data. Another dimension, in terms of method, is qualitative data. This is more about exploring concepts, less focused on standardization of research tools or research instruments, and it involves the researcher has a stronger presence typically compared to quantitative research, and also you're typically working with text. We can also think of modes of research, experiments, surveys, field research, and also unobtrusive research. And I'm going to go a bit more into each of those modes now. Experiments, well, it involves two groups that are similar to one another. One gets exposed to a change in condition, which is the treatment, and the other doesn't get exposed to that change in the condition. And then the researcher is able to see how the changed condition impacts on behaviour. Experiments are very popular in, obviously, psychology, social psychology. They're increasingly being used in economics, in behavioural economics. They're less used in social research because a lot of the phenomena that we're interested in studying are hard to kind of represent or set up in a lab environment. For example, peer influence or something like that. However, the internet is actually bringing new ways of doing experiments. It's creating new opportunities for conducting experiments using social research in social research. We're not going to be looking at experiments today. Okay, surveys. These include questionnaires, interviews, and focus groups. Again, we're not looking at that today, but basically on surveys in online research. That's one of the most popular modes of online research is the online survey. It's essentially conducting a survey but through a web browser, quite similar to the offline survey. There are some challenges though associated with it, and this is something that I cover in my course at the ANU, but we won't be talking about that today. Field research, this is where you observe people and events as they naturally occur, and there are two types, participant observation and non-participant observation. With participant observation, the researcher openly identifies him or herself and interacts with the research subjects. So it might be a person embedding themselves in a company for half a year so they can observe how people juggle the work-life balance. Non-participant observation, that's when you're aware that you're being studied but you don't really know why and it doesn't really affect your behaviour. So an example is if you walk through a public space, sometimes you'll see people with clipboards and they're looking at you and they're writing something down, or you're walking through a doorway and you're having to kind of negotiate the public space with other people, and then someone's off to the side watching you and recording things about how you navigate your way through that public space. That's non-participant observation. Finally, there's unobtrusive research. Now, the three modes that I've just mentioned, they all involve some degree of researcher-subject contact. And that can lead to changes in behaviour, which is known as the Hawthorne effect. With unobtrusive research, there's no contact with subjects at all. And what we're doing there is examining the traces of social behaviour that people leave behind as they go about their lives. There are two main types of unobtrusive research. Secondary data, that's using data collected earlier by someone else for another purpose. And then content analysis. So it's the study of recorded communications. And this is really the most relevant to what we're doing today. So I regard analysis of digital trace data, for example, Facebook profiles, website content, click behaviour, Twitter, etc. It's an example of unobtrusive research. People know when they're online, they know that their data could be getting recorded or is being recorded. We all have to sign an agreement when we sign up for our Facebook account. But the question is whether or not that knowledge actually impacts on our behaviour to the extent that it would affect the research outcomes. It all depends on what you're studying. If you're studying illicit behaviour online or behaviour that is socially unacceptable in some ways, then it might be that the people who are engaged in that behaviour will be doing things to hide their activity. It might be just that they make their Facebook profiles private rather than public because they don't want people to know who they're connecting to and what they're doing. But if you're studying behaviour that's not that people are not trying to hide, then I regard that type of data as being an example of unobtrusive research, or research using that data as unobtrusive research, and it is a valid source of social research data.